Well, good morning, everyone. It is 9:01. We'll get started. Senator Avard is not in today, so I'll be chairing the committee. If you would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Senator Waters, I'm going to ask you to chair for a minute since I have to introduce the first bill.
I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 60.
Good morning, committee members. For the record, my name is Senator Howard Pearl. I reside in the town of Loudon, and I represent District 17. I am here this morning to introduce Senate Bill 65, relative to stormwater management for solar arrays. I'm going to just do a brief introduction, and I know we've got a good discussion coming with the folks that are behind me. So just the overall thing that this bill does is it brings New Hampshire's stormwater and wetlands rules for solar projects in line with the best available science on environmental impacts. New Hampshire's current rules reflect outdated science and present an unnecessary burden for solar projects to overcome. This red tape can easily add millions of dollars in construction costs. These costs are often project killers. When projects die, they deprive landowners of lease revenues, towns of tax revenues, and New Hampshire households of electricity bill savings. By cutting unneeded solar project costs, this legislation strengthens New Hampshire's competitive energy market while still ensuring robust environmental protections through best scientific practice. I know that DES has some concerns with implementing this the way that I've submitted the bill, and so I look forward to having a good conversation where we can get an information exchange and see what everybody's ideas on how we can improve the process. Thank you. Okay, we've got a group of folks that I would like to kind of have all come up together. If I may kill some of these names. Sam Feigenbaum, Dale Knapp, Scott Williams, and Lindsay Burgoyne. If you all want to kind of come up together, we can be happy to take your testimony and have a discussion. Just pull up some more chairs if you got room there. If it's helpful, somebody could sit right on the end there, too. Well, good morning and welcome to Energy.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Turn your mic on, please. I just asked each one of you to introduce yourselves as you speak so we can get you on the record.
Sure.
You can use both mics.
Morning, Senators. Is that working okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Sam Feigenbaum. I run policy for Kearsarge Energy. We're a solar and storage developer and owner-operator based out of Boston. We operate over 295 megawatts of solar and storage projects across the Northeast, and we have a major focus on New Hampshire. We're committed to the state for the long haul. We have a pipeline of over 30 projects in the state, totaling over 160 megawatts, and we own and operate what is to date New Hampshire's largest municipal net metering project on the Manchester landfill. Senator Pearl, I think you summarized the issues well, why we're here today. The DES's stormwater rules that are currently in place threaten the economic viability of many projects in Kearsarge's pipeline. As you'll hear from the other folks on this panel, many of their projects as well. I think a good way of illustrating the problem in simple terms is your typical solar project in New Hampshire is about 20 acres in size. footprint of 20 acres. And under DES's rules, on average, you're required to build about 3 or 4 acres of concrete stormwater basins. That costs, in many cases, upwards of millions of dollars. And projects quite simply don't have the revenues to support those added construction costs. Also, it's an issue that makes a lot of landowners unhappy. One of the real benefits of solar is that it's low impact construction. Once the useful life of a project is over, what a landowner has is a meadow, and they can do what they want with that meadow. They can develop it in another fashion. They can plant trees to start a timbering operation. They can farm it. They can do what they want. If they have 3 or 4 acres of concrete stormwater basins, their options are much more limited. The good news here is that the science shows that these rules, these burdensome rules, aren't necessary. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, and so will my colleagues here. The rules in place in neighboring states like Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts reflect this. And the key issue here is that in Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts, solar panels are considered pervious. Rain falls, it drips off the solar panels onto the underlying land cover, which in most cases is meadow, and meadow has considerable capacity to store stormwater. This approach has worked really well in states like Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts, which all have built far more solar than New Hampshire has, so have considerable experience with this issue. So in essence, that's all this bill does, is it brings the New Hampshire stormwater rules in line with the rules in neighboring states. It doesn't exempt solar projects from any DES rules whatsoever. It's just an alignment approach. We've been talking about this issue with DES for a number of months now. And we have made some progress, so we're quite hopeful that that collaboration will continue and this legislation won't be necessary. But this is a quite urgent issue. Projects are at risk right now. Kearsarge has had projects die precisely because of this issue. Projects that otherwise would have gone ahead, we've had to kill because they weren't economic under these rules. And I know from other developers that they have had that same experience. So this is not just a future issue. This is a now problem that needs fixing immediately. The good news here is that we agree with DES on where some of the best science on this issue is coming out of. In particular, it's coming out of the University of Minnesota in conjunction with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Which has produced a tool called PV Smart, which takes advantage of the best science on this issue. And that PV Smart project has produced a methodology that allows you to estimate quite accurately the stormwater impacts of solar projects. Where we're still having a hang-up with DES and where we're hoping to get to yes is on following the methodology that the PV Smart scientists have set forth. And there are a few key methodological inputs where we're still in conversation with DES, trying to get them comfortable with the PV Smart methodology. So we'll be meeting with them tomorrow on that exact issue, and we'll keep you posted on our progress. I also want to bring to your attention that we're also in conversation with them on a wetlands issue. The current guidance from the department is that you cannot place solar panels in wetlands full stop, even if you have no other commercially viable option for building your project, even if you have looked at avoiding and minimizing to the extent that you practically can. So we're also in conversation with them on that issue. We think DES's position on that is outside their regulatory authority. We have legal memos to that effect that we'd be happy to share. So I did want to just put that issue on the table as well and make you aware of that because there's a potential that this bill will not just need to address the stormwater issue, but also that wetland issue. I think that's a decent overview of the high-level situation here, and my colleagues to my left Dale Knapp from Walden Renewables, Scott Williams from Pathways Consulting, and Lindsay Burgoyne from Revision Energy can talk you through more of the details. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. And whoever would like to go next, just introduce yourself as you speak, please. Sure. Would you take a question?
Absolutely.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because you were the one who talked through it, I thought I would ask a question about the interaction with DES on what counts as pervious array. And they do note in their letter that if certain spacing requirements are met in a project, that then it's considered pervious, and they affirm that this is actually what the other states are doing in terms of their definition of pervious. Is that correct, or is that not the practice that you're aware of?
I would say that DES's position on that point doesn't reflect our experience in other states. And we agree with DES under their current rules that under their approach, sometimes solar panels are considered pervious. I would just say that's in very few instances. So the vast majority of the time, even if you're on, relatively flat land, and if this is New Hampshire, this is not Ohio, you're very rarely going to get entirely flat land. The vast majority of projects that we're looking at in our pipeline, say probably 90% plus of our projects, and we've looked pretty darn closely at this, the panels aren't considered pervious. They're considered impervious, like they're a parking lot.
If I could follow up on. So you mentioned the basin construction. Is that pretty much universal for projects, or is it just on particular ones where the slope of the site requires it?
Under New Hampshire's approach, it's pretty much universal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we have too many microphones on. It only will support 4, so maybe we could shut one of those off so that the committee members can ask questions. Thank you. Senator Rosenwald.
Well, I hesitate to ask a question because it's my first day ever. Thank you.
We'll walk you through it. You're going to be good. Okay.
This is terrifying for me. The tool that you mentioned out of the University of Minnesota, is that backwards looking, or is it current and taking into account the fact that storms have become more severe?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
We've looked, again, pretty closely at this, and we've spoken with the folks behind the project, and they represent that their science and their study and the calculator that came out to it is the most recent, most up-to-date science that we have on this question. So it does take into account what we understand about the growing size of storms, yes.
Thank you.
All right, who's next?
I think it's me. Morning, my name is Dale Knapp. I'm the head of development for Walden Renewables. I'm a licensed soil scientist, site evaluator, professional wetland scientist, and I live in Portland, Maine. In my role at Walden, we develop projects primarily in Maine and New Hampshire. We have a very large portfolio, primarily of 20 megawatt projects, but here in New Hampshire we have a portfolio of about 13 distributed generation projects, so the 5 megawatt, approximately 20 to 30 acres in size. I guess I'm here to kind of help speak to the best science. I spent 20 years as an environmental consultant working on energy projects in New England before taking this role with Walden. And I think, if I included in my testimony some photographs, you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here. These facilities are constructed with a driven pile so that underneath the panels, the natural soil and meadow vegetation can remain. And I may be a little bit biased as a soil scientist, but I think nature does it best. And so when it comes to stormwater treatment and site stabilization, you can't beat vegetation and natural soil. So I think one question before was asked that maybe I'll jump on top of as well. In Maine, I've permitted probably 150 solar projects. Of those, maybe 10, 15% of them have been built. But Maine does not view panels as impervious surface regardless of any spacing. And so, you know, when it comes to the PV Smart calculator as well, it's kind of like it's like a predictive, sophisticated perk test. You need to evaluate your soil texture, your slope, kind of the porosity of the soil, to figure out what the treatment capacity of that buffer underneath your panels is. And so the PV Smart calculator is designed to do that based on those parameters. I think it is, again, important to consider where the real concerns are is some of the stormwater regulations under like a SWIP. It's really kind of primarily during construction. What we're talking about here is sort of post-construction stormwater treatment. And in my experience and expertise, you know, you can ultimately improve the conditions under these panels. You know, if you look, and I've included a lot here, don't hurt your head by reading all of it. But sort of the short and the sweet is that if you're trying to improve, you know, soil health and quality, you're going to maintain vegetative cover over that soil. Every time you cut the grass, you're going to leave those clippings on the ground. That organic material is going to be incorporated into the topsoil. And over time, year after year, you're actually improving the capability of that meadow area underneath the panels that you can see in those pictures to provide, you know, more than adequate treatment. And, you know, to kind of piggyback on Sam's point as well, you know, one of the concerns that we have is increasing environmental impact by installing stormwater treatment structures that ultimately will remain sort of empty and unused if your project is appropriately designed and the meadow underneath these panels is established and maintained for the life of the facility. That's really what you need. I'm happy to field questions, but I want to take up all of your time because I could talk about this for a long, long time.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Two left, which one do you want us to go? All right.
Good morning. My name is Scott Williams. I'm with Pathways Consulting in Lebanon, New Hampshire. We specialize in all sorts of land development, but particularly stormwater management, planning, design, and permitting. I've been a licensed professional engineer since 2001. I'm licensed in New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York. I've also been preparing stormwater designs and permit applications for NHDES stormwater rules and alteration of terrain rules for over 20 years. The current DES alteration of terrain rules for solar arrays, as the others have mentioned, particularly the 1511, part 1511 in the rules, creates some unwarranted and additional burdens on solar projects compared to other types of development. The solar array rules, as I understand, became part of the AOT policy in 2024. They're some of the most extremely complicated and time-consuming regulations that we have to do for permit applications, including things for much larger types of projects such as gravel pits and you know, just massive sites. These add additional expenses for the design and application process and equate to some really significant expenses for the owner and the developer. The solar-specific portion of the rules do not follow the basic science, in my opinion, that has been widely accepted and used for decades. 1975 was when the TR55 method was started to be utilized. And it basically looks at the pre-development condition to the post-development condition and how you're changing that land to account for runoff. So if you're not changing the land, there shouldn't be a lot of change in the runoff. The solar rules, as my colleagues had mentioned, presume the panels suspended above the ground are essentially impervious areas, just like a parking lot or a roof. It's not for every condition, but for many conditions. When you reach an 8% slope for those solar panels, that's when those solar panel areas are considered just like a building. The problem with this is it doesn't account for the ability of the ground surface underneath those panels to still continue to absorb runoff. It basically ignores them. So, and the problem with that is in low impact types of development and the way that these are built, that land surface underneath the panels may have started, you know, as a grass meadow and remains a grass meadow afterwards, largely unchanged. So the problem is with this is that this doesn't account for that ground surface underneath in most, if not all, conditions, especially if you have a steep site, which is often where solar panels are going to be arrayed, because they provide a benefit in terms of, you know, layout. And so you end up with higher runoff amounts that have to be accommodated with the design, and we don't believe that was the intention of the science. The solar array installations, you know, are often, you know, considered low impact development. So they drill anchors to support the panels, and those are intended to reduce the amount of impacts to the site for the installation. In practice, these solar array rules require a substantial amount of stormwater measures to be built on the sites to accommodate this additional runoff that's created by overestimating the amount of impervious area. This dictates to literally disturbing more area for the stormwater measures to meet the rules than the solar array installation itself would actually disturb on the site. And that to me seems backwards. This increases the solar array costs through the stormwater design, the permitting, the actual construction, and long-term maintenance for a solar array. In terms of other factors, the solar array rules, in my opinion, actually increase the risk of flooding, water quality impacts, and erosion both on the site and also to downstream water bodies, because they're requiring additional impacts that would not be necessary if you were to just install a solar array on the same site. So if the only way to deal with the design, which is often the case, is to design a large stormwater basin on the site, that's kind of a centralized treatment. You're putting all of the runoff that would just have ran over the grass meadow through the site under the panels. And then you're putting this into a large centralized detention pond that has the potential to cause all kinds of other problems when that drainage eventually leaves the site. The current AOT rules without Part 1511 that specifically pertains to the solar arrays already addresses ground impacts, stormwater runoff, flooding, erosion, water quality treatment, and the actual ground alterations as they currently stand. So to me, the solar array portion of the rules seems redundant and basically just increases the complexity of the design and the permitting process, as well as the upfront implementation costs, and in some cases can make a solar array project cost prohibitive. To me, the DES rules should support, you know, environmental protections and the benefits, which is the main goal of doing a solar array project. Whether you support it or not, that is part of the benefit of doing that. So it seems ironic that the rules themselves make this harder to achieve by some of the things that they require. I appreciate your time, and that's all I had to say. If there's any questions.
All right, any questions? All right, Lindsay, we'll let you wrap it up for the group.
All right, thank you. My name is Lindsay Burgoyne, and I serve as the Policy Director for Revision Energy. And as you likely know, Revision operates here in New Hampshire, but also in Maine. And my intention is to close this panel with a comparison of what costs are to develop a project, a similar size project, to illustrate essentially the drastically differing results that we're seeing in terms of project costs. To begin, I would say quickly, it's important to note that Maine has strong science-led natural resources protection laws and regulations in place, but their regulations contain two primary differences to New Hampshire regulations. And first, there is the threshold at which detailed stormwater modeling is required. That's a 20-acre threshold in Maine. Here in New Hampshire, as you've heard, the modeling is required for projects impacting 100,000 square feet or 2 acres. So that incurs significantly greater costs when consultants, with consultants for both site analysis and civil engineering. Second, we've discussed this a bit, so I won't belabor it, but when detailed stormwater modeling is required, New Hampshire does have more conservative assumptions, which again, the regulatory difference leads to a larger construction scope of stormwater management features, which have been discussed and thus construction costs. So with a clear picture of those differences, let's look at a project site, and essentially we looked at a project here in New Hampshire within the 10 to 20 acre range, and how that would play out here and how that would be treated in Maine as well. In Maine, projects within the 5 to 20 acre threshold trigger a permit by rule program. And generally speaking, for a project between 10 to 20 acres, we typically pay about $5,000. And that's because such projects are not required to construct any permanent stormwater features. That cost estimate includes permit fees, which the permit by rule permit fee in Maine is $279. And then some civil engineering work because an erosion plan and a site plan is required for those projects. So in New Hampshire, we'll take an actual similar project, again, in the 10 to 20 acre range that would require AOT permitting. Costs plus civil construction costs to implement those stormwater features. We pulled this data from an actual project, and the stormwater, I should say that the project was constructed within an existing hayfield, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the stormwater related permitting costs were $15,000. And then we were required to construct 3 stormwater basins at approximately $160,000 to build. So the total for that project was $175,000, which is 35 times the costs of what Maine law required. That included a permit fee of $8,125, which is 29 times what the permit cost is in Maine. I do want to be very clear that this is essentially the baseline. You know, my colleagues here today have seen significantly higher costs for permitting and infrastructure development, as noted, upwards of $1 million. The reason this is really the baseline is we're talking about a 10 to 20 acre project, and it's essentially on a hayfield. It's essentially flat. There's no slope. We didn't have to remove any trees. So kind of the site complexity leans itself to kind of the most lenient project or opportunity, as you will. And as you know, regulations and cost fluctuates really based on that size location and what the topography really looks like. This was a site with no slope implications. I think we can all agree that some change is warranted when regulatory red tape is causing 35 times the cost of a development to a neighboring state. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters. Max. Would you put that curtain down?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Lindsay. In looking at this, and I see the point about pervious and so on and so forth, would you think it might be reasonable in the legislation to have an exception whereby if DES believes that there is, due to the site, a particular issue to pursue about arrangement or maybe even the storm basin, that it would be by that means rather than the blanket?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I certainly think there's opportunity to have more detailed conversations about what can work here, right? That certainly is our intention, to work with DES to figure out what kind of some of those middle roads can be, and I think we've already made some substantial progress in that. Regarding the specific question, I am going to defer to Sam to answer that. I feel like my role here was costs, so I think if you feel like you want to add anything to that, please do.
Yeah, thank you again for the question, Senator. I would just add to that we think the PV Smart Calculator is that middle road. The PV Smart Calculator does not consider panels to be pervious in all circumstances. It just, in our opinion, does a much better job of following the science and considers panels to be pervious in most cases, as opposed to the current rules where they're considered pervious in very few cases.
Thanks. I'll follow up with the DES folks, but thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you all for coming in. Appreciate it. Sam Evans Brown from Clean Energy New Hampshire. Good morning, Sam, and welcome.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Sam Evans Brown, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. I don't have a great deal of expertise in this area. I'm not a soil scientist. Clean Energy New Hampshire, members are all behind us. Clean Energy New Hampshire's main interaction in this has been to attempt to sort of broker a peace between all parties, and that has been going back all the way to 2020 when these rules were first put in place as guidance. We had sort of a summit with DES where we flagged the concerns with the approach that they were taking at that point. Those concerns were not heeded at that juncture. I will give a mea culpa that when the rulemaking was opened and that guidance was then turned into rules, we sent it out to our members and had said, essentially, we knew that this was an issue when this was guidance. Have folks figured out how to work within these rules? And frankly, I think we were at an odd juncture in the development of the solar industry in the state of New Hampshire, where there simply were not a large number of projects that have really come to interact with the rules yet. And so the folks who had the expertise to do to read them and give commentary simply didn't have them on their radar yet. And so my mea culpa is that when the rulemaking was open, we did not submit comments, and that was an oversight. We really should have dealt with this then. Since then, we have been attempting to broker conversations with DES, and really, I think, would have preferred to not have this discussion before the legislature, and would have loved to get to some sort of accommodation with DES beforehand. So far, those conversations have not been as fruitful as we had hoped. And I think the reason that we're all here today is that it's really important that we get this right now. And so what I'd flag is, first, the country writ large, and New Hampshire is no exception to this, is experiencing load growth in the electricity sector for the first time in decades. ISO New England is forecasting between now and 2033 a 500 megawatt increase in New Hampshire's peak loads, which is quite a lot. And when you look at the type of energy generation that could be built today that can meet those loads, the only thing being proposed within the borders of the state of New Hampshire are solar and battery storage. Those are the only projects that are actually being actively brought forth by developers as we speak. And so it's incredibly important that we nail this now. And if we don't, I think that there's a real risk that a lot of these projects simply do not come to pass, and then we might start to experience times where there's just not enough electricity to meet demands. So to just put not too fine a point on this, Kearsarge talked about their pipeline. I can tell you that we know that within Eversource's territory alone, there's 500 megawatts of these smaller scale, 20 acres and less solar projects that are in the interconnection queue as we speak. I was looking at the ISO New England queue, which is utility scale projects, the bigger projects. There's 120 megawatts of utility scale projects that have very recently signed interconnection agreements and are going to be coming forward and are going to be bumping against these rules. And while DES would assert, I think, and fairly, that it's important for environmental protection that we don't set precedents that would allow solar projects to do damage to the environment. I would also respond that if we have rules that are not based on science, that are stopping projects from happening, those projects will simply go away. So the time is now to figure this out, and I don't think this is something that we can push off for another legislative session.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Appreciate your testimony. Griffin Roberge from Eversource. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, members of the committee. Griffin Roberge, Manager of Government Affairs with Eversource Energy, and Eversource is here to testify in support of Senate Bill 65. As has been previously referenced, I as well am not a soil scientist or an engineer or any of that. But I do work in government affairs, so I'm going to speak from a high level. So, as a public utility, Eversource does have the ability under RSA 374G to invest in distributed energy resources like solar. This is certainly an area of statute that we are considering projects in the future. We believe passage of this bill will help streamline DES permitting for solar projects, which reduce development costs and the length of time for permitting. We, in general, view this bill as a good step to assist in future solar development. That's really all the testimony I have. I understand that there are some discussions between the proponents of this bill and DES to find some agreement, some common language, and we look forward to seeing any type of future amendment on that front. So I will stop there and take any questions.
Thank you, Griffin. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, Phil, from New Hampshire DES, I gave you a chance to hear what everybody's concerns were, and now you've taken a neutral position, but we'll give you an opportunity to respond and give the department's position.
All right. Good morning. For the record, my name is Philip Trowbridge. I'm the manager of land resources at New Hampshire DES. And with me today,
For the record, my name is Amy Clark with the Department of Environmental Services. As some of you may know, I am switching agencies, so there might be a little bit of a change there, but I am the new Bureau Administrator for the Alteration of Terrain Program at Environmental
So
Services.
we don't have to talk about school safety?
We don't have to talk about school safety today, thank you.
okay, great. So I think it was a very good testimony earlier, and you have our letter, and I won't be recounting it. We aren't taking a position, but I do disagree with some of the characterization of the DES rules, and we'll get into a bit of that in what we're talking about today. I think at a high level, what we're talking about is a difference that's a matter of degrees and how we regulate this type of industry. And that we're having some discussions on this regarding how to manage this through the rules, which I think is the appropriate place to do that. This is a nuanced type of development compared to the normal thing that's covered by alteration of terrain, like large Walmarts, big box stores, subdivisions, et cetera. When you're dealing with solar, you've got often sloped surfaces. And most of those big projects that I mentioned before are cut and fill projects where they come in and level a site to begin with, and then they put the construction on it. A lot of these projects maintain their slope, and so there's greater potential for runoff and erosion as a result. So we have to have some sort of way of dealing this through our rules, which is why we've done it the way we've done it. I would say that the whole reason we have these rules is we felt that our existing rules would have been unworkable for the solar industry. Because of the fact that there would be concentrated runoff, and we needed to provide a bit of a break to allow this type of development. There may be disagreement about where that break needs to be, but I think we'd all agree that when you're dealing with a number of panels, let's say hundreds of panels on a sloped surface, a steep slope, you're going to have runoff and you're going to have erosion. And there's been some spectacular water quality problems in our neighboring states under these solar projects. We're trying to prevent that. The other thing that the hierarching important thing about this is it's all site specific. It depends on the soils on the site, depends on the slopes, depends on the prior conditions of the site. And that's what we're trying to work out through the rules, is a way that you can make those evaluations. So broad brush generalizations just don't work in this case. Declaring by fiat that all solar projects are pervious on meadows does not match when you're going to clear cut a steep slope to put down solar panels. So this needs to be evaluated on a site-specific basis, which again is how we do it through the rules. So I would say that the process that we'd like to do is continue to work with the solar industry on revising our rules. We've had meetings where we talked about waivers that are possible under site-specific basis. And that is certainly the fastest way to achieve their ends. If this is really an urgent situation, working with our existing rules and getting waivers where it's warranted is the quickest way to achieve that. We recognize that the science is evolving. and we'd like to evolve the rules with it. But we basically have, just a handful of years' experience with this industry. It's really premature to attempt to, declare by legislation how these should be regulated. It needs to be evaluated on a site-specific basis.
Thank you for your testimony. Amy, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add, I think there were some statements about solar panels being required for treatment. Our rules currently don't have any requirements for treatment for those pervious or impervious surfaces.
All right. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the testimony. Just one I had was if there was an accompanying storage project here, that the storage facility building pad, whatever it might be, would be a separate evaluation as to its siting, wouldn't it?
Thank you for the question. Regarding a battery storage facility?
Yeah.
If it was, contiguous with the panels, then it would all be wrapped into one project. If it was, let's say it was, in a separate parcel, distant from the panels, then it would be a separate permit needed.
Okay. So, if I may, on this. So, I wondered if you would respond to the statements about how other states are handling it and the acreage size.
Yes, so the alteration of terrain statute is what we have here in New Hampshire, and the thresholds for requiring permits are set in the rules for that, and they're consistent across development types. So it's 100,000 square feet of development, which is 2.3 acres. It's a fairly large development. If we're talking about a subdivision for housing, that's about a 30-house subdivision. Or if it's, a large big box store, it would be a large production. These aren't small projects that we regulate. We actually regulate at the sort of the high end of what we should be for stormwater management. So there are differences. Sure, we don't have a permit by rule or permit by notification process for alteration of terrain in New Hampshire. But we do have, what we do require is that when you exceed that threshold, which I think is a very high one, that you do have to prove that you're not going to disrupt the hydrology through your construction. And I recognize that a lot of these panels are installed through helical piles that are driven into the ground. But you first have to prepare the site, and maybe it's a flat meadow already, a hayfield. That's fine. That's an easy situation. But if you're going to be clearing a property and stumping and grading it, you're disturbing a large area in the process.
If I may follow up on
One
that.
more?
So,
Sure.
it does seem to me that the legislation says the point is not to have a kind of additional set of regulation just because it's solar panels, and to say that the principle is that they are considered pervious, and the guidance that is offered from that Minnesota study provides sufficient science in order to make those kinds of determinations as to what the impacts would be. So I guess that's the heart of the bill. And so my question would be that yes, I hear what you're saying about rules. I'm glad about the good discussions, but I do think that there is something legislatively here to do about the size and get us more conformity with our surrounding states, and also about the definition of pervious. But what would you think about language that, off of what's here, to say that except, and to give you the opportunity for a particular project or terrain to say that we do have some issues that would need to be addressed for this site. So it'd be kind of flipping it and saying that now it says impervious, but we try to work through the rules. The legislation could say pervious, but giving DES the appropriate rights for a particular project to make certain assertions. I think the storm basin thing is something that I wonder about too. So, I guess that's how I'm trying to lay it out. What do you think?
Sure, and so I think this is what I meant by sort of a matter of degrees, because currently in the rules, it's not declared that all solar panels are impervious. It depends on the level of the slope, or how steep the slope is, and it depends on the spacing between the panels. And so as you have a flat slope, a flat area with adequate spacing, we consider those pervious. And then it's just as you move along that continuum from steeper slopes and panels closer together, there's a point where there's so much runoff that it becomes concentrated and starts erosion. And so we have a point where that hits it. It's a little bit lower than the point where the PV Smart calculator hits it. These are sort of, we have the same principles. Essentially, it's just a slightly different calculator. And so it isn't a case where the department has said that all panels are impervious. They're actually the opposite. We're saying because we put in these rules, we're allowing things to be considered to be pervious under certain circumstances. And the point where we start considering it impervious again is a little bit lower on the continuum than the industry would like it to be. And then we have to, in terms of using this PV Smart calculator, there's a lot of work that we need to do to relate and cross reference the parameters for that model to things that people measure in the field. To make it applicable and useful to us for the same soil information that people give us for any other project. Again, I think this is a highly technical, fix, a highly technical calculation, and we just need to work that out through the rules. I think that's the best way to go. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's not a case that the rules are making a blanket assumption. They're actually allowing for flexibility to this industry. If we were to remove those rules, there wouldn't be that flexibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah. I guess I have two questions.
Yeah.
Really, isn't it the case that if we really want you to rethink your rules, we have to act legislatively, because otherwise the department just works on its own rule timing. So isn't it the case that if the legislature thinks the policy herein is correct, we have to make that change, so you will write the rules differently?
Thank you for the question. I think there's a way that there's two different ways to establish a legislative policy. One is to establish the policy in the legislation and say this is what is going to be. The other is what is going to be in the rules. Another way is to say the department shall do rulemaking or modify the rules by such and such a date, right? And that sets a boundary and a requirement for the department to make those changes. I would just, our mindset on this, not just for the solar industry, but for all industries, is that it's site specific. And I don't know, to draw a comparison, we're dealing with a housing crisis. If we were to say, okay, all housing projects are going to be assumed to be flat and sandy by legislation, does that make the site flat and sandy? It doesn't. Our approach to this is based on the conditions on the site is how we have to manage the stormwater. And I'd say that we deal with two different types of stormwater management. One is during temporary construction BMPs, or best management practices, to prevent erosion during the construction. And then there's the stormwater management for the long term, so that the hydrology on the site hasn't changed. And what we're dealing with is trying to make sure that the neighbors and abutters do not see a change to their property values as a result of erosion and flooding, increased flooding. And sometimes the temporary systems can be just repurposed into permanent ones. Sometimes we can use vegetated swales versus concrete basins. It all depends on the site. It all depends on how much runoff there is. It's really site specific.
Follow.
One follow-up? Sure.
Thank you. So it seems to me that there's a difference in permeability between a Walmart taking up 2.3 acres because it's clearly impervious,
Yeah.
and a bunch of solar panels which have some space between them. Isn't there, how are those two things the same in the department's view?
Thank you for that question. Here's just an example. Okay, the orientation of the panel does not have to be parallel with the slope. So imagine a case where you've got a steep slope, like coming down from the windows, but the panels need to face that way. And they're all lined up so that the water hits the panels and rolls to the side and then all comes down in a line. And you have basically a gully forming that erodes out the slope. It's a case where you're concentrating the flow, you know? And so the orientation of the panels can be important. And that's part of what our rules try and address, which is to say when there's, you know, parallel and up to a certain percentage, we would consider that to be pervious, because the water will roll off. It'll fall down, you know, in a in the same direction that it would normally flow, and it would have a chance to infiltrate. Again, it just sort of depends. And then none of these sites are uniform. They have slopes that change, hills and valleys. It's, you know, it can be tricky in terms of how the stormwater needs to be managed. We're open to modifying our rules. We just feel like we need some more experience with this industry. And in our discussions with them, we've said, we know that you can't wait for us to become, you know, for long, but we do have flexibility that we've offered through the waivers process that can be in effect immediately.
Senator McConkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Turn your mic on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be with you once again. We've spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
Could you help me understand when the matrix starts to come to play, when it went from pervious to impervious? What is your, and if you don't know, if you could just get the information to me.
Yeah.
At what percentage slope does that happen with adequate distance between panels?
I believe it, and Amy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's when we go from a 0 to 8, we have the 3 different slope areas, like 0 to 8, 8 to 15, and the 15 and above, roughly in there. So it's, when we get into that middle one, depending on the soil type and the spacing is where we start to have the issue with imperviousness.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, well, listen, we appreciate you coming in, your testimony. I know there's further conversations going to happen between DES and the industry, and we're probably going to sit on this bill just for a little bit and give you guys a chance to work on that and see if we can, you know, maybe find a path forward here. But I just would encourage you to go and faithfully have those conversations, and let's see if we can get this worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. So the last one I have is Josh Elliott from DOE. If there were questions, Josh, anything you feel you want to address?
I don't know if you have unless the committee has questions.
All right. Any questions that anyone would have for the department? All right. Thank you. Anybody else that would like to speak on Senate Bill 65? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing. All right, next up will be Senate Bill 106, and Senator Lang is here, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. This should be deja vu for those who were on this committee last term. Last year, this bill was Senate Bill 79 when we passed it. It had a drafting error. Made it through the House, made it through the Senate, made it through the House, and then the governor caught the drafting error and vetoed the bill. So I'm bringing it back. This bill does a couple things. As the chair, again, I'm Senator Tim Lang from District 2, Chair of Ways and Means. So regularly through Ways and Means, we hear a lot about businesses that want to come to New Hampshire, and we talk about what are the impediments of that happening in our state. Taxation is one, and I think we've done a good job at managing the taxation side that encourage businesses to come to New Hampshire and develop and move from other states into our state. The second issue that we generally hear about is energy. The cost of energy in New Hampshire, especially for things like manufacturing that consume a lot of energy. The cost of energy is a major factor in whether or not they move to the state. This bill seeks to address that concern. So what this bill does is allow industrial host generators to produce up to 5 megawatts provided that 100% of that consumption is consumed by the generator and consumed by the group to help lower the energy costs. The PUC has done a docket that talks about the cost of net metering, whether or not there's a shift in cost of net metering, and I won't get into the technical details there, but needless to say, what the PUC has said is that it's a de minimis amount, or an amount that they can't even register. They don't know that the number is so small that there is no cost shift to any other ratepayer that they can't calculate. So again, this bill would expand up to 5 megawatts industrial host generators to be able to consume up to 100% of the electricity. In the amendment that I provided, which is amendment number 0088S, one of the things I forgot to do is put a definition of what an industrial host generator is. So the bill has that definition in it. In addition to that, the PUC in its docket was looking at the fact that under our current net metering rules, they expire in 2040, which is 16 years from now, which may seem like a long time for us, but if you're a business looking to implement millions of dollars into an electric grid, 16 years isn't that far away when you got to deal with, you have to finance it and look at the ROI. And so what this bill does is create a rolling 20-year plan for the state, so that as a industry comes on, as a solar panel group comes on, it will start the clock for 20 years at that point, so that they can get the financing necessary to be able to implement these. If you've done anything, as you may know, out of an odd coincidence, Senate Bill 106 was also the Senate bill that I co-sponsored with Senator Avard 2 terms ago, which created the municipal host net metering. And that's been a great tool for our municipalities. And I believe this bill is going to be the same great tool for our industrial to help offset some of those costs. Again, I want to emphasize one thing. The industrial host generators must consume 100% and not generate more than 100%. So this is not a light bulb behind the panel that it create a revenue generation stream for them. This is an offset cost for them to be able to offset the electric costs that they incur while doing business in the state of New Hampshire. I'm happy to take questions, but I know there's a big list behind me of people. I will say that this has pretty broad support across the industry besides the renewable people that like this bill. BIA is a strong supporter, again, looking at our businesses in New Hampshire and how to attract them into New Hampshire and bring more manufacturing into the state.
Thank you. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And deja vu all over again. Here we are, right? But you know, the mention we have from testimony and so forth about at least the 20 years, the 25 to 40 years in terms of the financing and so forth. Would it make any sense to find a way in statute on lines 19 or 21 to have the 20 years or longer language? Now it's 20. And then if the new tariff comes in, you can move into that. But would it be possible to have some language that would get that longer period in there?
Thank you for the question. Again, that's a great question. I settled on 20 years in this bill. It was a conversation with some of the other people that wanted a longer term. I was unwilling to do that. Again, looking out that far is, as it is now, we're trying to do a crystal ball action and looking out another 5 years, another 20% or another 25 or another 50% to 30 years. I'm not sure we can do that. I think that, again, when we were looking, when I've been involved in solar projects at my school district in my town as well as in the county level, and when we looked at those, they were always a 20-year look forward, right? What's the ROI over 20 years and how do we make that work and total cost of ownership? It was a 20-year span. Now, some of these solar panels have, 30-year life cycles, which is fine. It means they get 10 years outside of that, right? But I'd rather look at the smaller time frame than the larger time frame in an effort to be conservative.
Yes. I'll talk to other folks, but what would you think about a mechanism whereby at the 20 years you could have an automatic renewal for a certain number of years? Or would you be able to work with something that gave that flexibility?
Again, I save that for a future legislature to look at, right? If we put this in, we get 20 years, we can see how the projects are working, see how it's rolling, and then 10 years from now, we realize we want to extend that out. We can take a look at it, but to jump right now to 25 or 30 years, I think would be inappropriate.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thanks for your testimony. Mike Skelton, BIA. Good morning and welcome. Mike, please turn your mic on. Hit the button.
There we go.
There you go.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity this morning. My name is Mike Skelton, President and CEO of the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire, New Hampshire's statewide Chamber of Commerce and State Manufacturing Association. We're here today in support of Senate Bill 106 with the proposed amendment that Senator Lang just spoke to. I am circulating a formal letter of support, which I won't read, and just want to offer a few general comments today. Senate Bill 106, in our view, is one of the most important pro-business pieces of legislation filed this session and a top priority of the BIA. I'm sure there's a lot of others behind me this morning who are going to provide expert testimony and technical expertise on industrial self-generation and net metering and related policies. So the few comments I'd like to share today are just really a step back to provide a bigger picture view on the urgency of action we need to take on addressing our state's uncompetitive energy costs by using all available tools. From 2013 to 2023, electricity prices are up 26% overall in the United States. In New Hampshire, over that same time period, electricity prices are up 60%. We fall into the 10 most expensive states in all ratepayer categories and share prices similar to California and Hawaii. And this is information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. You know, the BIA, as part of our mission to champion a competitive business climate, we look at all manners of economic competitiveness. And energy costs, as Senator Lang just alluded to, is really our Achilles heel. We have a lot of strengths to our business climate. We continue to see a lot of forward momentum in business growth. Advanced industry jobs, advanced manufacturing has been growing in New Hampshire. But this is a real threat to our continued economic competitiveness. And as you know, there's a lot of factors that go into this, and being part of regional energy market means that not all of these factors are entirely within our control. SB 106 represents one solution to start addressing these uncompetitive prices for our largest energy users, manufacturers, and industrial facilities. In our view, this is a narrowly tailored step forward to allow for industrial self-generation and has the potential to lower energy costs for our largest consumers of energy, while also providing them with an increased measure of reliability at a time when we continue to see generation sources leaving the energy market here in New England. I also want to be clear that we do not view this proposal as mutually exclusive to other solutions. In the BIA's overall public policy priorities, we view the state's approach should be an all of the above resource development when it comes to lowering our energy costs. This is just one solution, one tool in the toolbox that we need to deploy, and we need to deploy all solutions to make our energy costs more competitive. But the status quo is simply not sustainable. We need to start moving forward on some of these solutions. I can tell you that in my travels around the state, talking to our nearly 500 members and talking with manufacturers and industrial users, there is real frustration, there is fear and uncertainty around what these continued costs are going to do to their business and their ability to stay and grow in New Hampshire. And on that note, I'd be happy to follow up with the committee if you're interested in connecting with some of those users and hearing firsthand from them of how these projects would transform and assist their businesses. They're also always willing to bring people in for tours, extremely educational, and really helps put a finer point on the urgent need to take action in this area. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but thanks for the opportunity this morning.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, appreciate it.
Thank you.
James Shannon. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. Attorney Jim Shannon. I'm a resident of Rochester. I've been practicing in Rochester since 1993. Like the honorable member of this general court, I'm nervous. I've never testified before a Senate or a House committee before. And I'm also suffering from a bit of a cold, so I apologize in advance. I'm noted as being an objection to the bill. It's not the entirety of the bill. There are certain aspects of the bill. My colleague, business partner and client is here and will testify as well, former state rep Packy Kimball. My objection, I'm going to focus on the specific aspect of the bill, which is the effective date, or when it deals with in new paragraph 3, starting at line 27 of the draft bill that I have. It refers to facilities eligible for net metering with an effective date after January 1 of 2023. So that's 2 years plus from today. My concern is that both the U.S. and the state founders looked with great disfavor upon retroactivity of laws. Both the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, and in New Hampshire, Part 1, Article 23, clearly said that it's not favored to have any law that is retroactive. Multiple reasons for that, but it's primarily because it's inequitable and injurious to the rights of citizens who have undertaken action. In our case, I'm an investor in a solar project of 1 megawatt, just under 1 megawatt in Rochester. We undertook those actions in reliance upon the existing laws at the time of net metering. So it's pretty clear in New Hampshire that the opinion of the justices in what's called the Furlough case had pretty strong language that we therefore understand that Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution and Part 1, Article 23 of the state constitution offer protection for laws that impairs a contract where the law abrogates an earlier statute, changes the statute, and will have the protections to try to prevent such kind of harms. This bill, by dating back to 2023, over 2 years, our project started in 2021. We literally filed our first interconnection application with Eversource in 2021. We still do not have an in-service date. We've been working this project for literally in excess of 4 years. And we're very close to being done. Our project is on our end, it's completely done, but we just have testing that we have to undergo before we can be turned on. So under the law, there's no 20% mandate. Currently, under the statute, there's no 20% mandate that we consume 20% of our power, or else we have to become a group host. So our interconnection agreement is a direct sale of power. To a certain extent, we're a light bulb in a field. Side note, I'm not sure why everyone objects to that. We're capitalists, we're just trying to make money. The laws allow us to not necessarily consume the power, but this bill will make it that necessary, or if we don't, we're then forced to become part of a group host arrangement. Group host arrangements take about maybe 1.5 cents of every kilowatt that we would sell. So under the current default rate, which is 10.4 cents roughly per kilowatt hour, if we were to give up 1.5 cents of that income to become a group host, that's 14.4% of our projected income. That's a rather substantial, significant financial detriment to us who made a business investment decision of multiple millions of dollars and have been working for 4 years on this project. That would have a significant financial harm on us and others in our situation. I'm sure if they're not here, there are others in the state that we're not the only ones that have complained about how long it takes to get interconnected with Eversource. That's in different matters. But in our case, it's clear that any statute that affects an existing right or improves the new duty or creates a new disability, there has to be a good reason for the legislature to do that, to impose that retroactive date. And I haven't heard the speaker say why it's retroactive to 2023. That's to be the proponent. And frankly, I find it hard to understand why it is back to 2023, unless, frankly, there's some kind of attempt to be punitive to folks that are in the queue and aren't done yet. I just don't understand why making it applicable for any net metering with an in-service date of 2023. I just don't understand why that time period exists. If if the legislature does seek to be retroactive, then there are some tests of what you have to do to prove that there's a substantial public interest of why we're going back. And then there's a balancing of reasonableness and necessity of that. And I haven't heard anything articulated as to why that is. Perhaps somebody that's in favor of the bill can testify to that. But it's pretty clear that in our case, I'm giving you specific facts. If this bill was retroactive and we are then forced, because we don't consume 20%, we are then forced to become a member of a group host arrangement, it's going to cost us 14.4% of our projected income today. Of course, the default rate changes. We know that. There's an inherent risk in that. But by making this bill retroactive, it causes a substantial impairment of the investment of myself and my partner and others in similar situation. So if the bill were to pass, we would suggest that it's, equity and fairness calls for people, investors, and developers of solar to have some certainty, to know what the guideposts are. And those guideposts, in this case, of now saying if you don't consume 20%, you have to be part of a group host, to give us time to react to that. Again, without belaboring the point, in the PUC and the DOE, there are plenty of folks that complain about how long it takes to start and finally get your project turned on and into service. We're not the only ones that have that problem. So this bill, if it's going to become law, the time period of its effective date should be posted well in the future, because these things take literally, I've told you, we started in 2021. Here we are in 2025. So there's a great lead time. So the time period in which this law should be effective shouldn't not only be retroactive, it shouldn't even be current. It should be out into the future, whether it's a year or two, because that's how long it takes us to get these things done. And so I respectfully suggest that if the bill is to pass, that it should be amended to certainly not be retroactive, and it should have a date well into the future so that the developers and investors can react to this change, substantial change in the law that would have financial effect on folks like us in particular and the industry in general. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I'll be glad to take a question.
Great. Any questions from the committee?
Thank you very much.
I guess my one to you, actually, before you go, I just want to make sure. So you're feeling like we should not only make this, the 2023, perhaps the date of the effective date, but also should be further ahead?
Absolutely. And perhaps somebody else can shake their head and say, yes, how long they've been in the queue.
Yeah.
But we literally had our first interconnection application in 2021. Now, Eversource over time changed it, and our current date was May of 2023. But even that is after the date that this is to be effective. And so if it takes this long for these kind of projects to come online, because you have an in-service date, for the sake of discussion, if you said an interconnection application date, that's a different beast, okay?
Yeah.
Because the interconnection application date is well prior to the in-service date. And so, we've been literally trying for 4 months to get our final testing done. We completed our construction like 10 months ago.
Okay.
But even though our construction is done, we're still not in service. So if you're going to use the in-service date, then it should be well into the future, because that's how long it takes to get these things built, permitted, built, and online. And if you use an interconnection date, then that could be more reasonable to today, or perhaps it could be, January of 2026, so that developers have time to react, because again, the length of the permitting and engineering of what it takes, it should certainly be a prospective date and not a retroactive date.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I appreciate your time.
You bet. Of me? Of the gentleman? Yes. James, would you take one more question? Senator Rosenwald has one if you'd like.
Yes, ma'am.
How much of the electricity is your project planning to consume?
Very little. We, as I said, preliminary, we're the proverbial light bulb in the field, okay? Which I don't understand why folks think that's bad. I mean, we're trying to meet the state's stated policy of the development of diversified energy, and to provide that at a local, small level. We tend to think, we're proud that we're small local developers. We don't have Wall Street money that's funding this, okay? We're small local developers that literally have put my economic future in line in this particular project. that if we lose 14% of our income, that's huge, okay? So the fact that we're a light bulb in a field, I'm not sure why that's viewed negatively. We're just seeking to meet the social policy that's been advanced by this legislature and the state to promote diversified energy at a small local scale to meet the needs of our society to reduce greenhouse gases and all the reasons why we're trying to do this. But yeah, we don't consume, we have a light bulb. Our electricity is simply what it costs to, what we have to do to run the equipment.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Josh Elliott, I think this might be a good time to bring you up.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Elliott with 2 L's, 2 T's, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs for the New Hampshire Department of Energy. So I will be brief in my remarks. I imagine you folks have a lot of questions. I have not, I will preface this with saying I have not seen the amendment that Senator Lang has mentioned in his testimony, so I don't have a copy of the language in front of me, so I can't speak to that at the moment. However, the department is neutral on this bill. I think as we've testified in the past, we want to make sure that there are appropriate, thank you, safeguards to ensure that there is no cost shifting between ratepayers, to ensure that that equity is maintained. Sorry, I'm taking a quick look here at the bill. I can certainly provide some feedback after reading it through. I do want to mention a couple of things. There are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in part of this process. The governor is one of those stakeholders. As you can imagine, she is very focused on the state budget process. As those of you who are on finance, I'm sure, are well aware. That's coming down the pike with a submission date of February 15th or thereabouts. So we're waiting to get feedback from the governor to see what she's comfortable with. So we would respectfully ask for the committee to sort of hang on to this bill to allow time. The department is happy to engage with stakeholders, to speak to Senator McConkey's predecessor, Bradley Special, potentially, in finding something that maybe everyone can live with, maybe not necessarily happy with. I do want to add, given I do see the language here in the amendment, this grandfathering question. This is, or the legacy period, just for context and then for comment, this was brought up in Public Utilities Commission docket 22060, which is collectively known as the net metering docket. This issue was litigated. The Public Utilities Commission decided in favor of the department's position, which was to sunset this legacy period of having a date finite of December 31st, 2040. That is what the PUC ruled on, and that's what the PUC decided in favor of. So be aware that if you decide to make that change, this is sort of, I will liken it, I'm sure I'm going to get shots at for this, but, dad said no, now we're going to mom and seeing so she can say yes to this. So just be aware that that is the context of what you're making this decision in. Regarding the legacy period, I know that I've heard the comments regarding, stability for financing, et cetera. The way that it is structured, at least in the bill is introduced, and it looks to be the same way in the amendment here, that there's a one-way ratchet, right? If there's a better deal that a solar array or a developer or an owner can get in the future because there's another rate, there's a one-way ratchet. But if for some reason that rate goes down, they're locked in. So there's a one-way ratchet that can only go up. They get the best deal for them, no matter what else is going on. So fundamentally, net metering, in the view of the department, as I think is established by the legislature, is meant to be fair compensation, right? It's not meant to be a subsidy. It's meant to be a fair compensation recognizing the value that is provided by those arrays. Legacy period, arguably, and as I would argue, is a subsidy. You're guaranteeing a rate for the next 20 years for a particular facility. I would posit to the committee, what other private business gets a 20-year guarantee for their rates? Somebody's got to pay for that insurance policy, right? And it ends up being the ratepayers. So there was, Senator Waters had brought up, what if we look further out? I would posit this to the committee. Do we here collectively in this room know better what the conditions in 2040 are going to be, rather than the people, the legislators, person in my place in 2040 is going to know what those conditions are? I wouldn't take that bet. So it remains to be seen, right? If there is a very dim view of what that compensation is going to look like in 2040, it is going to be because of what either the legislature or the Public Utilities Commission decides the value should be for that generation, right? There could be a sea change in technology, who knows? The value could go dramatically up, it could go dramatically down. I don't know the answer to that, but should the ratepayers be on the hook for that? So with that being said, however, I want to reiterate my earlier comments. Happy to work with this as a base, happy to work with the prime sponsor and other stakeholders to see if there's a way we can get to yes on an industrial host construction.
Thank you. Josh, questions from the committee? All right, seeing none,
Okay.
we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sam Evans Brown.
Members of the committee, thank you. Sam Evans Brown, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire again. I guess I just have to respond to what the Department of Energy just asserted, that a 20-year legacy period is a subsidy. Clean Energy New Hampshire has been participating in the docket 22060. I have, to date, seen zero evidence put forward in that docket that there is, in fact, a cost shifting or substantial risk of cost shifting that's associated with net metering. As Mr. Elliott just stated, net metering is intended to be just compensation for distributed generation that recognizes the unique value that locally sited generation has. You don't need as much of the transmission system. Generation is happening close to load, and so there is unique value. So it's an administratively determined rate and tariff that is recognizing that unique value. Obviously, any administratively determined rate has to be tweaked over time as that value changes. But that's why we commissioned this value of distributed energy resources study that found that essentially there is incredibly limited risk that there's going to be any cost shifting out over the next several decades. So, in fact, what that study found is that particularly large customer generators, like the ones that we're talking about, are being undercompensated. So they are providing more value to the grid and to ratepayers who are not the direct beneficiaries of that generation than they're being paid for. The range of value that the study forecast was between 11 and 17 cents. Currently, those generators are being paid 8 cents. The idea that this would lock that compensation in over 20 years is just incorrect. It's set at the default service rate. The default service rate fluctuates every 6 months according to the energy markets. And as was acknowledged in the docket, that is an inherent hedge against any risk of cost shifting. So I find it a little baffling that this specter of cost shifting continues to be raised. It feels like we had put this to bed, and I would, what I would love to do is direct. I can send along to the committee evidence that's been entered into the docket that essentially substantiates that. So I would simply say, Clean Energy New Hampshire supports this bill, supports the amendment. I just briefly on the concerns from Mr. Shannon, I think that in-service date is a typo, and we should fix it. I would also argue there's plenty that could be fixed in the language of this bill. I think Mr. Shannon's concerns are certainly valid and should be taken into account.
Thank you, and certainly any information you feel the committee needs, please send it along to us. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Becky Campbell.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
I'm Pat Campbell, and I'll just briefly tell you a bit about myself. I'm a former rep. I had the opportunity to serve in the New Hampshire House for 4 years.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. Thank you, Sam. Is Senator Waters going to be back? Because I feel like where he's been a proponent of this bill over the decades, it would be appropriate for him to hear my testimony.
He is introducing another bill. He can certainly review the.
Okay, I just wanted to point that. And the same thing with Senator Avard. I feel like they're, having the committee here would be appropriate. So I do have a handout that I think will be appropriate. You want to hand that out to each one of the members? And again, I filled out for Jim that we both oppose the bill, but I think we both support the bill too. In that the two things that I'm going to ask you to consider to change in the bill is that you change the definition of customer generation, which I don't understand why. Customer generation in the start of the bill, again, I'm without Senator Lang's amendment, so I'm assuming he did not change that. But in the language of the bill, for reasons that escape me, that is located behind a retail meter on a customer's premises is struck from the language in the definition of customer generation. And the issues that we're talking about, whether you believe cost shifting exists or doesn't exist, it doesn't make sense to change that definition. That definition has significant import in the development of projects. So for instance, the project that we built that you can see on the back folder is 60 dual asset tracker. It's probably a limited number. It's probably the first dual asset tracker project in New Hampshire. It's 1 megawatt AC, just under 1 megawatt. To the prior bill, you can see it doesn't really have drainage impacts, doesn't accelerate drainage off the site. It's not fenced in. It allows for wildlife corridors. It's 50 feet from all wetlands. It's a very harmonious type of solar project development. It has been over 4 years trying to get approved. But the biggest thing I'd like to point out about this development on that sheet is that it creates a positive cash flow for the utilities. And when I say the utilities, I mean it creates a positive cash flow for all the ratepayers. So in the back of your folder, you'll see a Google Maps. If you could pull out that Google Maps, I just want to illustrate a point here about, everyone talks about light bulb in the field, and to my associate over 25 years, that's kind of a derogatory statement. It's kind of something that the legislature has said we don't want. And I'd like to kind of change that dynamic. It's a wonderful tool. The solar farm itself at the default rate, based on the projections that we feel it will make about $240,000 a year in revenue based on a default rate of 10.4 cents. As Sam Evans mentioned, that changes every 6 months, goes up and down with the market. There's nothing fairer. The average price to sell electricity in New Hampshire is 24 cents. So when you look at the Google map, this is essentially behind the meter. It's not a light bulb in the field. The physics of how solar generation, distributed generation works is it works in that very concentrated geographic area. This power isn't going more than a few thousand feet away from where the solar generation is. And because it gets turned into 34,000 volts, that few thousand feet is no electrical loss. And electrical loss is a big cost of generation. Like you're basically, you don't have to truck the eggs. The eggs are in your backyard. You're not going to the grocery store. You're not picking them up. Someone's not trucking them. There isn't a big egg manufacturing plant. Literally, you have chickens in your backyard. They're making the eggs. It's very effective. So this project will make the ratepayers of New Hampshire, this one project, will make the ratepayers of New Hampshire $314,000 a year. That's in contribution margin. Now, I admit, the utility has to deliver that power in that half-mile, quarter-mile area. But the cost to maintain those lines is not $314,000 a year. This really benefits the little old lady in Milton on a fixed income because it's going to lower her costs. When the utilities go every 6 months before the PUC to make their rate case, this is tangible. It's $314,000 less. The projects that I've built, again, we're small, really real estate developers. I'm a real estate agent by trade, mostly built houses and some commercial stuff. We got into building solar about 5 years ago because we read the legislation and said, hey, they're going to pay us the default rate. We invented this technology, not invented it, but we, as entrepreneurs, put it together with a bifacial panel, real-time light sensing. The reason you see all these pushes from, and I respect Senator Waters, Senator Lang, and I respect the governor for vetoing it as well, but they keep pushing for bigger than 1 megawatt projects because if you do 1 megawatt of a ground mount solar project, it doesn't make enough money to make it worth doing. You can't do a light bulb in a field if this was fixed ground mount. It just wouldn't make enough power. This barely makes economic sense. This is more like a I just wanted to do something good for the environment, something good for my community, and it will make a little bit of money. When you talk about the 14% contribution margin, when you look at that after our cost, it's probably more like 40% of our profit margin, 50% of our profit margin. If you pass this bill as written, it wouldn't make sense. So I do have another handout. Basically, I'm just looking for two changes in the bill to try and wrap up my testimony here, is that you leave the retail meter. In my situation here, because we didn't have a retail meter, which current law says up to 1 megawatt, we're supposed to have a retail meter. So I believe the utility violated state law. I filed a formal complaint with the PUC. They did not agree with me. I filed a motion in docket 060 with the PUC. I am now an interpleader on that docket. I've also applied for a rehearing in that docket. There was no evidence similar to prove that cost shifting doesn't exist. The docket order specifically asked for information from investors. And I'm not only an investor in solar, I also have several projects where we're doing the financing. And all of that falls apart if you change the located behind a retail meter. So we had to get a primary meter. So as a customer generator defined by statute, I was required to be what I think Senator Ling just created, this new term, industrial something user. And I think it's good that he amended the bill and created that new language. But that should really be your 1,000 kilowatts, your 1 megawatt to your 5 kilowatts. That definition should apply there. So in the last section, to alleviate Mr. Shannon's concern about the retroactivity, instead of on the last line, if you look at the bill, it would be line 30, and it says generators larger than 100 kilowatts. If you essentially change that to generators larger than 1,000 kilowatts, that would be consistent with the decade plus practice of small customer generators and large customer generators. It wouldn't have the fundamental rug pulling out as I would describe that this bill could have. So if you change that to 1,000 kilowatts, you really solve the concerns that Jim had because it wouldn't affect our project. It also would allow for projects less than 1 megawatt to have this positive fiscal impact and more people to be able to deliver real value to all the ratepayers. On the front page, just real quickly, there's a picture of a project I did on Sterling Drive in Rochester, New Hampshire. And you can see a mini storage facility where we put in 11 of these solar trackers right up through the roof of the solar trackers themselves. This was very beneficial. And again, we don't probably use 20% of the power on this. It's a mini storage facility. But the biggest problem with the 20% consumption behind the meter is you don't regulate it. When you look at a power bill, the only thing on a power bill is your purchases and your sales. We don't have the technology in New Hampshire to know what we consume behind the meter. It's an unprovable fact. We shouldn't, and I can't cite case law, but you shouldn't pass a law that I can't say, oh, I consume 20%. And most of my 90 plus solar systems that I've built for customers and myself consume almost all of the power. Of the last year, we made about 3.5 megawatts of solar in projects that I have built or sold. This year, if Shaw Drive comes online, like we hope soon, we're on track to make about 8.5 megawatts of solar power, just as a small business out of Rochester, New Hampshire. And that's profound. The economic impacts beyond just the contribution margin like you see on Sterling Drive, it was clear. I own this car wash, so I know I'm paying 30 cents a kilowatt. I own this storage facility, and I know I'm getting paid 10.4 cents a kilowatt. The grid is making 18 cents to deliver power from here to my car wash. And coincidentally, I made 6,200 extra kilowatts last month in December, and I used 62 kilowatts in my car wash. So I paid $1,900 over here. I got paid $700 over here. It's not big money, folks. It's really probably should be higher, as Mr. Evans said. It should be more like 11 or 15 cents, and it should be for the life of the investment. Everyone's talking about this 20-year legacy period, which I support. That's better, I guess. But I have another amendment. I would just say in the existing 362A9 Section 17, where it says you have the right to interconnect until 2040, and then you shall take whatever's offered at that point. I don't know what they're going to offer at that point. At 15 years, I don't know what my investment returns are going to be. That creates tremendous uncertainty for me and my clients. And as we get closer to that date, we just can't build the solar. It would make a lot more sense that you have until 2040, you get net metering 2.0. And then after 2040, you may, all you gotta do is take that shall and make it a may in the existing statute. If you did that, that would make a tremendous amount of stability for the investors in the industry, customer generators, which are the small businesses, the small homeowners. We should be promoting laws, no offense to the larger companies that were here, I appreciate them, but when we look at what we should be doing, we should be helping New Hampshire residents. And to be able to do solar for somebody and have it offset 100% of their bill, and then they get a small check. So in the storage facility, in my car washes, I own 4 other car washes. My cost for electricity in New Hampshire is 7% of my total revenue. That's crazy. My cost for soap in my car wash is 5.8%. Electricity is the largest cost to run a car wash in New Hampshire. We have a problem. Customer generation can address that problem for so many small businesses. I own mini storage, I own a rental business, I own an assisted living facility. I don't want to go on and on, but sir, what I'm saying is all of those businesses benefited from customer generation. Please don't change that definition, because in Shaw Drive, I had to spend an extra $400,000 to be on a primary meter, to be what I call a power generation utility, to be what Representative Lang now calls some new definition that I just can't recall what he said. But if you're between 1,000 and 5,000, or 1 megawatt and 5 megawatts, then be that other definition and be it as it may. Respectfully, you don't even really need that. If he's saying in his testimony, we use 100% behind the meter, that's not what the bill says. The bill says use 20% behind the meter. Again, which you have no way to track. But right now, I have systems that we've built, 120 kilowatt system, and we can't get approval from Eversource to set a net meter. But it's on an industrial manufacturer who makes gun parts. Guess what? We're running the solar because it's used behind the meter. Shaw Drive, 17 Sterling, it's used behind the meter at the car wash. Even though it's not used by this site, it's used in close proximity. Shaw Drive, it's used by Albany Composites, just across the thing. That one business consumes all the power we're going to make. It is behind the meter. I want to make sure that just because it's in a field, it still has the effect of being behind the grid, or because of the way the facility works. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gamble. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, we appreciate it. You've raised some good points.
Yes. Of my flyer? I will give you my last 2 because I like you.
Thank you, sir.
And then I also have, for the record, for the committee, an example of net metering 1.0 that's grandfathered,
Okay.
and a net metering 2.0. And I think it's important that you understand the differences in the bill.
Sure.
That net metering 1.0, I think that cost shifting may have existed to a little bit, but net metering 2.0, there is no negative cost shifting, there's only positive cost shifting. And that's been in the case since 2017. That is the standard practice for the last 8 years.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right, we'll move on to Meredith Hatfield from the Nature Conservancy. Is Meredith here? Oh, she was not speaking. I'm sorry. I looked at the wrong line. All right. Kyle King from Coke Northeast. Good morning. Welcome.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'll keep this short and sweet. My name is Kyle King. I'm the Operations Sustainability Manager for Coca-Cola Beverages Northeast. We operate in all of New England and upstate New York and a small sliver of Pennsylvania. We are headquartered in Bedford, New Hampshire. We have about 3,400 employees. We also have a production facility in Londonderry, New Hampshire, 3 sales centers in the state as well. So I'm here representing Coca-Cola Beverages Northeast in support of this bill, One of the things we're looking at is on-site solar across our entire portfolio. This would support our business as well as help us meet and achieve our sustainability goals. So right now it's capped at 1 megawatt. We're looking at possibly doing an on-site solar project at our Londonderry facility, which would be up to a 3 megawatt solar project. That would be, like I said, it would be good for our business. It would help support the local community and jobs. Also be good for our sustainability goals. So just wanted to express our support for the bill. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Seeing none, appreciate you coming in.
Thanks.
Jonathan Lapointe from AG New England. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. As you said, I'm Jonathan Lapointe, representing Associated Grocers of New England. Thank you for taking the time to hear our perspective on our state's business community on this important legislation today. And a special thanks to Senator Lang for his leadership on this bill. As stated, I'm Jonathan Lapointe. I'm here representing Associated Grocers of New England in Pembroke, New Hampshire, in support of SB 106. AG is the largest retailer-owned wholesale grocery distribution center in New England, proudly serving the needs of our independent retail grocers since 1946. Since our humble beginning, AG has consistently and considerably grown. Our headquarters in Pembroke currently spans just under 500,000 square feet to accommodate the hundreds of employees and thousands of products necessary to provide for the communities we serve. As you can surely imagine, a facility of our size and nature has significant energy needs. While large amounts of resource consumption is certainly not unique to AG, our passion to approach problems through a socially responsible and solutions-based lens is. In 2021, we were able to align both our fiscal goal of reducing operational expenses and our commitment to sustainability through the installation of a rooftop solar array. If you visited our facility today and climbed onto the roof, as many lawmakers have done, you would see our 1 megawatt AC solar array made up of 3,400 solar panels generating up to 1.45 million kilowatt hours of clean power annually. At the time of installation, it was the largest rooftop array in the state, and today offsets nearly 20% of our total electrical load. Our array is a great illustration of how policy impacts businesses on the ground. Much of our facility's rooftop remains empty when we have on-site demand that we could serve. We're asking that you help our state's business community control its energy costs, remain cost competitive with out-of-state businesses that have more supportive policies, and enable us to invest further in economic development right here in New Hampshire. We believe the removal of the 1 megawatt cap for industrial generators, paired with a fair, predictable term, is essential policy to support New Hampshire's industrial and manufacturing industries. For these reasons, please pass SB 106. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, tell Russ I said hi. Well, thank you. John Morrison from Hitchner.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
My name is John Morrison, and I'm the Executive Vice President, Secretary, and Treasurer at Hitchner Manufacturing in Milford, New Hampshire. I'd like to thank Senator Lang for introducing SB 106 and to this committee for holding this hearing and listening to my testimony in support of the bill today. Hitchner was founded in the Amoskeag Mill Yard back in 1946. It was acquired by the Morrison family in 1949 with the intention of growing the company in New Hampshire to create employment opportunities and contribute to the New Hampshire economy. Today, Hitchner is headquartered in Milford, New Hampshire, where we employ more than 650 employees who work hard every day to produce over $250 million in components for the global aerospace, defense, and automotive industries. We've also reinvested nearly $100 million in New Hampshire over the past 5 years in support of current and future growth. We'd like to continue to grow in New Hampshire, but the comparatively high cost of energy in the state makes it difficult for energy-intensive businesses like Hitchner to remain competitive here. In New Hampshire, Hitchner consumes more than 25 million kilowatt hours annually. at a cost of nearly $5 million. That represents nearly 5% of our New Hampshire sales at an average cost of about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's more than 2 to 3 times as much as some of our competitors pay for electricity in other states. While we invest heavily to offset these costs through efficiency projects, we have a small solar array, for example, where we use all the power behind the meter. There's only so much we can do to reduce our demand relative to our growth. That's why I'd like to express my support for Senate Bill 106 today, which would give us the opportunity to participate in net metering at a more efficient scale in order to offset just a portion of our large and growing electrical demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, we appreciate it. That's all I have on the sheets. Is there anybody else that would like to testify on Senate Bill 106? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. All right, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 107, and Grant Bossy is here to introduce the bill in Senator Lang's absence.
Thank you, Senator Pearl, members of the committee. My name is Grant Bossy. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff for the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 107 on behalf of Senator Tim Lang, the bill's prime sponsor. This isn't so much a housekeeping bill as it is a bookkeeping bill. At the request of the Fish and Game Department, this would authorize the treasurer to invest the funds from the non-game species special fund. Due to how the bill was drafted, the treasurer does not have authorization to invest these funds, so they're essentially just sitting there in the bank account as cash. We are getting some interest on that to the general fund. This would authorize the treasurer to invest those funds, get some investment returns, which would be fed back into the non-game species special fund, which is the purpose for which it exists. So again, this is as at the request of the department, who can answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your consideration for Senate Bill 107.
Thank you, Grant. We'll save the, Senator Waters, you want to wait? Okay. Thanks, Grant. Dan Bergeron, New Hampshire Fish and Game.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dan Bergeron. I'm Chief of the Wildlife Division for New Hampshire Fish and Game. It's always kind of a relief when everyone leaves the room for one of your bills. Hopefully I can make this brief, get you all back on track. Point of clarification here. So the way that this works, actually, there was a slight inaccuracy in the fiscal note. So the Fish and Game Department actually already gets interest on the money that is in that account. Currently, though, it goes into the Fish and Game Fund. This would allow the money to go back into the non-game fund. So it's not so much that the money's coming out of the general fund, it's coming out of our Fish and Game Fund and then being put back into the non-game account, which is really so the non-game program can get the benefit of that interest. It's not really large amounts of money. One of the reasons we wanted to do this was because we've recently, so the non-game program in part is funded through private donations. Through state statute, we're not allowed to use PR dollars, federal Pittman-Robertson dollars on threatened or endangered species. So the non-game program is largely funded through private donations, competitive state wildlife grants. Through those private donations, recently we've had some individuals who've been looking to make larger donations, and they'd like that donation to build interest and then for the program to be able to benefit from that interest. The way that the account was set up, that's not possible. So that was one of the big reasons we were hoping to make this change. Again, the overall amount of money that the non-game program would get is fairly minimal, but we feel it will help build additional donations. And it does provide match for other federal dollars that we can leverage. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're looking to do. This is also consistent with a lot of our other accounts. Our game management account is set up this way. Our threatened and endangered species compensatory mitigation fund is set up that way. Our wildlife habitat account and our fisheries habitat account really all have almost identical language to what we've proposed in this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator.
Thank you. So if the money currently goes to the Fish and Game Fund and you do make interest, and the language says, including any federal monies which become available, what is going to happen if we pass this to the Fish and Game Fund? Is it going to be depleted? And is the department going to have to keep coming back to the legislature for general funds?
So we estimate this will be about $30,000 to $50,000 in interest that would go from the Fish and Game Fund over to the non-game account, which again is all within the department. So this certainly will not make a huge difference in terms of the overall money in the Fish and Game Fund. So this was discussed internally, obviously, and you know the agency's position is we think the benefit, particularly given the way the non-program's funded, would be appropriate to keep this money in that. And again, because the program is largely funded through donations, we think it's appropriate that the interest from those donations goes back to the work where individuals are making the donations for. So you know it will take a little bit of money out of the Fish and Game Fund, but nothing we see. It's not a make or break situation, I guess is the way I would put it.
Follow-up? Yes.
How much money does the department get from the federal government every year?
It varies depending on the program. The way our agency's set up, we have varying pots of federal money. I couldn't speak to how much it gets on whole. The Wildlife Division probably receives, this is a guess. I think the latest PR apportionments were somewhere between $4 and $5 million.
Just one more, if I could. Sure. Thank you. So all of that $4 to $5 million would now not support the way the bill is written, not support the entire Fish and Game Department, but just support the non-game fund. And so my question is, would you consider a language that said federal funds about non-game, let's say, so that it was not going to remove a huge amount of revenue from the department?
So I don't think that's an issue because, again, this is the same language we already have for our other accounts, our dedicated accounts, such as the game management account. And actually, the bulk of that money that I referenced goes to the game program.
So, Senator, I will remind you, this bill is going to go before Finance. If you have further questions about that, perhaps we could maybe take up that element of it when it comes to Finance. And that might give you a chance, Mr. Bergeron, to get some actual numbers together that would support that. Yeah. Would you be able to put that together for when this bill comes up in?
Yeah, certainly. So just so I'm clear, what specifically are you interested in terms of financial numbers?
Well, the language currently says, including any federal monies which become available from the federal government. So that could be a lot of money. which would all go into the non-game fund. The
so-
way this bill is drafted.
Yeah, I believe but that's specific to the federal monies that go into the non-game, because the non-game account is a dedicated account. So I think that's specific to this account, the non-game account, not any federal money that the department as a whole takes in. The way it works is the department has numerous dedicated accounts. So like the PR dollars are dedicated money that go into our game accounts, not into the non-game accounts. So those federal funds would not be impacted by the money that's in this account.
We'll look at it in finance,
Yeah,
because that
I
word "any"
I see your
is
concern.
broad. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any further questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, and I would suggest that some of the information you provided for the committee this summer might answer all the questions that Senator Rosenwald has. One of the primary points here is that this since we can't use Pittman Robbins on the non-game side, this would provide a fund for the non-game that then might be available for matching funds that we sometimes are not having enough to take full advantage of what we might be able to match to purchase land and other sorts of conservation, other sorts of things.
Yeah, so the fund already exists.
Right.
Yes, so this would allow the interest that's really already being generated from those monies to go back into this account as opposed to the general fish and game fund. So yes, it would provide additional match. And again, one of the big reasons we kind of were pushing for this now was because of the interest in larger donors to make large donations into the program with the hopes that that money would build interest, and then the interest would help fund the program as well. We've had some larger donors that had concerns about making those donations, knowing that their money would not be able to build interest.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the fund does already exist. It would really just be making sure that the interest goes back into it. So the way this was explained to me by our business supervisor was that the Fish and Game Fund, there's a total amount in there. We get, the interest that's built is sent back to the department, and then there's a calculation internally based on the percentage of money that each of these dedicated funds had in it. The interest is then divvied back out into those accounts, assuming there's language in the statute that allows that.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else that would like to testify on Senate Bill 107? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. I think we could exec this one. Could we take a motion to go into exec? Do we second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I'll move 107 off the pass.
I'll second. I will suggest a slight amendment, which I think might address Senator Rosenwald's concern. So on line 4, I think I understand how she's reading this, and I guess it's putting on my finance hat, I can understand. Just for clarification, if we, on line 4, after including any federal monies, if we added the words "which are deposited into the non-game species account," would that clarify that we were only talking about monies that were going into this account and not all federal monies that the department received? Would that make sense?
Can we ask Dan?
Dan, would you?
Dan, I mean,
If you want to come back up, Dan, we'll.
So,
because we are only talking about monies that are deposited into the non-game species account, correct?
Correct. I think that would be fine. I would like to review it potentially, and maybe perhaps with our representative from the Attorney General's office. Would you be comfortable if we did that and reached back out?
We do not have to exec this today. Okay. How about if we do that, then we'll hold this bill if you want to. You understand Senator Rosenwald?
I do. Yes, absolutely.
Here's why I want to fix it here. Looking at the fiscal note on this, there's essentially nothing.
Yep.
And I don't want to require Senator Gray to take this to finance if it's something that we can fix here where otherwise he could perhaps waive it.
Yes, appreciate that. Yep.
Let's do that then. Let's,
Okay.
If you can come back to us with a little something that would address.
Absolutely.
concern. I can understand her confusion.
Yeah, so her concern is that any federal monies for the entire agency, the interest would then go into this account.
It could.
Yes.
If you read it that way, I don't quite read it that way, but I can see how she is.
Yeah, so-
I think if we just clarify.
Yep, we'll get
specific
clarification on that.
Federal monies into this account, and I guess the same would be with state monies too. You know, any state funds appropriated to this specific account is really all we're talking about the interest on.
Yep, okay.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes. Did you vote on this? We did not vote on it yet. We were discussing an amendment, but I'm going to withdraw my second.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Yes.
And we're done.
And with that, I'll take a motion to come out of exec.
Move to come out.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And that concludes our business for today. Thank you, everyone.